The thing about betrayal is that it never announces itself with trumpets and fanfare. It slips through your front door wearing the face of someone you love, and by the time you realize what's happening, you're already broken on the floor. I pressed my face against the cold glass of my own front door, my swollen belly contracting with another wave of pain that sent fire through my spine. The porch light cast harsh shadows across my tear-stained cheeks as I watched my husband Julian laugh at something his mother whispered in his ear. They sat at our dining table, my grandmother's antique oak table that I'd refinished with my own hands, sharing coffee and pastries like it was Sunday brunch instead of the night I was giving birth to his child. My child. Our child. The child they'd locked outside in the freezing October rain. Please, I whispered against the glass, my breath fogging the window. Another contraction hit and I doubled over, gripping the doorframe with white knuckles. The pain was getting worse, coming faster. I needed to get to the hospital. I needed my husband. I needed help. But Dorothy, my mother-in-law, just smiled that cold, calculating smile and shook her head. Through the muffled glass I could hear her voice. She made her choice when she disrespected this family. Let her figure it out herself. Julian, the man who'd promised to love and protect me until death do us part, didn't even look up from his coffee. That was the moment I died. Not physically, though my body felt like it was trying. The Madeline who'd believed in fairy tales and happy endings, who'd trusted with her whole heart, who'd thought love could conquer anything. She died right there on that porch step, replaced by something harder. Something that understood the only person who would save me was me. Before we continue, please write in the comment which country you are watching this video. We love knowing where our global family is tuning in from. And if this is your first time on this channel, please subscribe. Your support helps us bring even more epic revenge tales of life. Enjoy listening. 3 hours later, I gave birth alone in a hospital room, with only a kind nurse named Ruby holding my hand while I screamed into the darkness. My daughter, beautiful, perfect Florence Rose, came into this world with just me there to welcome her. No father. No grandmother. No family except the woman who'd fought through hell to bring her safely home. But as I cradled my newborn daughter and stared out at the city lights beyond the hospital window, I wasn't thinking about Julian's absence anymore. I wasn't even thinking about the pain. I was thinking about the joint bank accounts, the house deed that had my name on it too, the family business records I'd helped organize, the trust fund Julian didn't know I knew about. The little legal details that Dorothy thought a simple housewife wouldn't understand. They'd locked me out of my own home when I needed them most. Now I was going to return the favor. By morning, they'd discover just how expensive their cruelty had been. And by the time they figured out what was happening, I'd be gone, with their money, their secrets, and the granddaughter Dorothy would never get to meet. Some people say revenge is a dish best served cold. I was about to serve it frozen. 6 months earlier, if someone had told me I'd end up giving birth alone while my husband partied with his mother, I would have laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was impossible. Julian loved me. We were happy. We were building something beautiful together. At least that's what I told myself every morning when I woke up in our perfectly decorated bedroom, in our perfectly restored Victorian house, living our perfectly planned life. The morning that changed everything started like any other Wednesday. I was 7 months pregnant, moving slowly around our sunlit kitchen while Julian rushed through his usual routine. His dark hair was still messy from sleep, and he wore that expensive cologne Dorothy had bought him for Christmas, the one that made my pregnancy-sensitive nose burn. "Coffee's ready," I said, placing his travel mug on the granite countertop. The same granite Dorothy had insisted we install, even though I'd wanted butcher block. "And I packed you some of those blueberry muffins you like." Julian barely looked up from his phone. "Thanks. Hey, Mom's coming over today to help with the nursery. She has some ideas about the color scheme." My hand instinctively went to my belly. "I thought we agreed on the soft yellow. It's already painted. She thinks gender neutral is limiting." He grabbed his coffee and briefcase, still scrolling through emails. "She's bringing paint samples. Just hear her out, okay?" The dismissal in his voice made my chest tight. This was our baby. Our nursery. But somehow Dorothy always got the final say. She'd chosen our wedding venue, influenced our house hunting, and now she wanted to control our unborn child's room too. "Julian, I really love the yellow. We picked it together, remember?" He paused at the kitchen doorway, finally looking at me. For a moment, his expression softened and I saw the man I'd fallen in love with. The one who used to bring me flowers just because, who'd rub my feet after long days, who'd promised me the world. Madeline, you know Mom just wants what's best. She raised 3 successful kids. Maybe we should trust her experience. And just like that, the moment was gone. He kissed my forehead, a quick, distracted peck, and headed for the door. I might be late tonight. Big presentation for the Xander account. The front door closed with a soft click, leaving me alone in our beautiful, suffocating house. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, watching the morning light shift across the marble floors Dorothy had insisted would be more practical than the hardwood I'd wanted. Everything in this house told the same story. Madeline's opinions didn't matter. Madeline's dreams could be painted over. Madeline should be grateful for what she was given and stop asking for more. But I was asking for more. I wanted my husband to choose me over his mother. I wanted our baby to grow up in a home where I had a voice. I wanted to feel like I belonged in my own life. The doorbell rang at exactly 10 o'clock. Dorothy Santino never arrived early or late. Punctuality was just another way she demonstrated her superiority over those of us who struggled with simple things like time management. I opened the door to find her standing on our porch like she owned it. Which, given how much influence she had over Julian, maybe she did. She was immaculately dressed as always. A cream-colored cashmere coat, designer handbag, and pearl earrings that probably cost more than most people's cars. Her silver hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon, and her blue eyes, the same shade as Julian's, swept over my appearance with barely concealed disapproval. Madeline, darling. She air-kissed both my cheeks, the gesture as warm as a January morning. Tired? Are you sleeping enough? Stress isn't good for the baby. And there was. Less than 10 seconds and she'd already managed to criticize my appearance and suggest I was a bad mother. Dorothy Santino was an artist with passive aggression. I'm fine, Dorothy. Just normal pregnancy stuff. I stepped aside to let her in, watching as she swept through our foyer like she was conducting an inspection. She ran a finger along the hall table checking for dust. Julian mentioned you've been emotional lately. Mood swings. It's perfectly natural, of course, but you do need to control them. Men don't like unstable women. My hands clenched at my sides. I haven't been unstable. I just have opinions about our baby's nursery. Oh, the yellow. She waved dismissively. Such a dreary color. Children need stimulation, dear. Bright colors. Gender-appropriate themes. Yellow is so beige. She pulled paint samples from her purse like a magician revealing cards. Hot pink. Electric blue. Purple with glitter accents that made my eyes hurt just looking at them. But we don't know the gender yet, I said weakly. We wanted to be surprised. Dorothy's smile was sharp as a blade. Trust me, darling. A mother always knows. This baby is going to be special. Important. They deserve better than yellow. She said the word like it tasted bad. We spent the next 2 hours in the nursery, Dorothy explaining why every choice Julian and I had made was wrong. The crib was too simple. The mobile was too childish. The rocking chair, my grandmother's rocking chair where my mother had nursed me and her mother had nursed her, was outdated and not ergonomically sound. We should donate it, Dorothy declared, running her manicured fingers over the worn oak armrests. I know a lovely shop that sells modern nursery furniture. Clean lines. Contemporary design. Much more suitable. Something inside me snapped. No. Dorothy's eyebrows rose. Excuse me. I said no. That chair stays. It's been in my family for 3 generations. My baby is going to sit in that chair just like I did, just like my mother did. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Dorothy's blue eyes turned to ice, and her smile became something predatory. Madeline, dear. I know you're attached to your family heirlooms. But you need to understand something. This baby is a Santino. They deserve the finest things, not hand-me-downs from people who couldn't afford better. The insult hit like a slap. My family hadn't been wealthy, but we'd been rich in the things that mattered. Love, loyalty, respect. Things Dorothy's money apparently couldn't buy. Get out. The words left my mouth before I could stop them. Dorothy's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed dangerously. I beg your pardon? I said get out. This is my house, my nursery, my baby. And that chair stays exactly where it is. Dorothy stood slowly, her movements precise and controlled. When she spoke, her voice was silk wrapped around steel. You're making a mistake, Madeline. A very serious mistake. Julian is my son. This family is my family. And if you think you can come between us. She let the threat hang in the air, then smiled that cold smile again. Well, we'll see how that works out for you. She gathered her paint samples and her purse, moving toward the door with regal dignity. But she paused in the doorway, looking back at me with something that might have been pity if it wasn't so cruel. Julian will hear about this, of course. And he won't be pleased. You see, darling, my son values family loyalty above all else. He always has. And when he has to choose between his mother and a wife who disrespects her. She shrugged delicately. Well, blood is thicker than water, isn't it? The front door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow sounded like a gunshot. I sank into my grandmother's rocking chair, my hands shaking as I rubbed my belly. The baby kicked as if sensing my distress, and I whispered soothing words I didn't believe. It's okay, little one. Mama's got you. Mama's always got you. But even as I said it, I wondered if that was true. Dorothy Santino had just declared war, and I was about to find out just how far she was willing to go to win. I didn't have to wait long. Julian came home 3 hours early, his face stormy and his eyes cold. He didn't kiss me hello. Didn't ask how my day was. Just stood in the kitchen doorway like an avenging angel, his expensive suit wrinkled and his jaw tight. We need to talk. Julian paced our kitchen like a caged animal, his footsteps sharp against the marble floor. I sat at the breakfast bar, my hands wrapped around a cup of chamomile tea that had gone cold 20 minutes ago, watching the man I'd married transform into someone I didn't recognize. She was trying to help, Madeline. That's what mothers do. They help. She wanted to throw away my grandmother's chair and paint the nursery hot pink before we even know if we're having a girl. So what? His voice cracked like a whip. Maybe pink would be nice. Maybe she knows something you don't. She's raised 3 children. You've raised 0. The words hit like physical blows. I placed my hands on my belly, feeling our baby move restlessly inside me, as if picking up on the tension crackling through the air. This is our child, Julian. Ours. Not hers. He stopped pacing and turned to face me, his blue eyes, so like Dorothy's, burning with anger I'd never seen before. She's his grandmother. She has a right to be involved. Him? How do you know? She knows. Trust me, my mother always knows. He resumed pacing, running his hands through his dark hair. And even if she didn't, even if she's wrong about everything else, you don't get to throw her out of our house like she's some kind of intruder. Our house. The words felt bitter on my tongue. It feels more like her house every day. Julian froze. What's that supposed to mean? It means she chose our paint colors. She picked our furniture. She decided where we'd go on our honeymoon. She has opinions about what I eat, what I wear, how I spend my time. I can't breathe in my own home without wondering if Dorothy would approve. That's ridiculous. Is it? When's the last time you made a decision without consulting her first? She's my mother. And I'm your wife. I stood up too fast, the world spinning slightly. Julian reached out to steady me, but I stepped away from his touch. I'm carrying your child. Doesn't that count for something? For a moment, his expression softened. I saw a flicker of the old Julian, the one who used to choose me. But then his phone buzzed and I watched him glance at it automatically. A text from Dorothy, no doubt. When he looked back at me, the softness was gone. You need to apologize to her. Excuse me. You heard me. You embarrassed her. Disrespected her. Made her feel unwelcome in her son's home. He crossed his arms, suddenly looking exactly like Dorothy when she was delivering ultimatums. Call her tonight. Apologize. Make it right. And if I don't? His smile was cold as winter. Then you'll find out exactly how unpleasant life can be when you're at war with a Santino. He left me standing in our kitchen, my tea growing colder and my heart breaking in ways I didn't know were possible. The baby kicked hard as if protesting the tension surrounding us, and I whispered another promise I wasn't sure I could keep. It's okay, sweetheart. Everything's going to be okay. But as the afternoon faded into evening and Julian didn't come home for dinner, I started to understand that nothing was going to be okay ever again. The war started with small things. Dorothy began calling every morning at exactly 7:30, just as Julian was getting ready for work. She'd have urgent questions about family dinners, charity events, or concerns about my prenatal care that required immediate discussion. Julian would spend 15 minutes on the phone with her while his breakfast got cold and I sat alone at the kitchen table, feeling like a ghost in my own life. "Mom thinks you should switch doctors," he announced one morning, not looking up from his phone as he scrolled through emails. "The one you're seeing doesn't deliver at the best hospital. Dr. Eduardo is wonderful. She's been taking care of me since we found out I was pregnant. Mom knows the head of obstetrics at Presbyterian. She can get you in. I don't want to switch doctors 7 months into my pregnancy." Julian finally looked at me, his expression patient in the way that made me feel like a difficult child. "Madeline, this is our first baby. Don't you want the best care possible?" It was a trap, elegantly laid. How could I argue against wanting the best for our child without sounding selfish? But I loved Dr. Eduardo. She listened to my concerns, answered my questions, and made me feel like a partner in my own pregnancy rather than an incubator being managed by committee. Dr. Eduardo is excellent care. Julian's phone buzzed. Another text from Dorothy. "Look, just think about it, okay? Mom's making calls today. She might already have you an appointment." My hands clenched in my lap. "You mean she's making decisions about my medical care without consulting me? She's helping. There's a difference." But I was beginning to understand there wasn't. Not in Dorothy's world. Help and control were the same thing, wrapped in expensive paper and tied with manipulation ribbon. The medical interference was just the beginning. Dorothy started appearing at our house unannounced, always with some emergency that required Julian's immediate attention. A problem with the family business that only he could solve. A crisis with his sister Natalie that needed his intervention. A health scare that turned out to be nothing but kept him on the phone for hours. She'd arrive just as we were sitting down to dinner, or when Julian and I were having rare moments of connection, or when I'd finally gotten him to talk about baby names or nursery plans. Her timing was surgical in its precision. "I'm so sorry to interrupt," she'd say, not looking sorry at all. "But Julian, darling, I need your advice about the Xander account. Your father would have known exactly what to do." She always brought up Julian's father when she wanted something. Richard Santino had died when Julian was 25, and the grief had bonded mother and son in ways that apparently left no room for wives. Any wife. Julian would drop everything to help her. Our dinner would get cold. Our conversation would die. Our moment would be lost to another Santino family emergency that somehow only Julian could solve. I started eating dinner alone. Then came the friends. Dorothy had a network of wealthy, influential women who'd known Julian since he was a child. They began dropping by for visits, that always seemed to happen when Julian wasn't home. They'd perch in my living room like elegant vultures, sipping tea and making observations about my pregnancy, my house, my life. "You look tired, dear," said Caroline Ashworth, whose husband owned half the city's commercial real estate. "Are you getting enough rest? Julian works so hard he needs a peaceful home environment." "Such a lovely house," added Margaret Thorne, whose family had old money and older opinions. "Though the decor is interesting. Very extensive. Julian's always had such sophisticated taste. I'm sure he'll want to redecorate once the baby comes." They never said anything directly insulting. Everything was wrapped in concern, dressed up as helpful suggestions, delivered with smiles that never reached their eyes. But the message was crystal clear. I wasn't good enough for Julian. I didn't fit into their world. I was a temporary inconvenience that would be managed and eventually replaced. I stopped answering the door. But Dorothy wasn't finished. She began hosting family dinners at her estate across town, elaborate affairs with multiple courses and expensive wine that I couldn't drink. She'd seat me at the far end of the table, away from Julian, and proceed to hold court like the queen she'd always believed herself to be. "Julian, tell everyone about the Xander presentation," she'd command, and he'd launch into detailed accounts of his work triumphs while I pushed food around my plate and tried not to feel invisible. "Natalie, how's the wedding planning going?" Dorothy would ask Julian's sister, who was engaged to a pharmaceutical heir and planning a wedding that would put royal ceremonies to shame. "Thomas, any updates on the European expansion?" She'd inquire of Julian's older brother, who ran the international division of the family business. She'd ask everyone about their lives, their work, their achievements. Everyone except me. When the conversation occasionally turned in my direction, it was always about the pregnancy and always in the third person, as if I weren't sitting right there. "How is she feeling?" Is she eating enough? Getting enough exercise? We want a healthy baby, don't we? I became a vessel. An incubator. A necessary inconvenience in the production of the next Santino heir. The worst part was watching Julian let it happen. My husband, the man who'd promised to love and protect me, sat at his mother's table and let her erase me one dinner at a time. He'd nod along with her plans, laugh at her subtle digs, and never once ask what I thought or how I felt. On the drive home from one particularly brutal evening, I finally broke. Your mother hates me. Julian kept his eyes on the road. She doesn't hate you. She's just protective. Protective of what? You're a grown man, Julian. You're married. We're having a baby together. She worries that I'm moving too fast. That we didn't know each other long enough before we got married. We'd dated for 2 years and been engaged for 1. How long is long enough? It's not about time. It's about compatibility. Shared values. Understanding what family means. I stared at his profile in the dashboard light, this man I'd thought I knew. What does family mean, Julian? It means loyalty. It means putting family first, always. It means understanding that some bonds can't be broken no matter what. What about the bond between husband and wife? He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, almost sad. My mother gave up everything for this family. She could have remarried after Dad died, could have started over somewhere else. Instead, she devoted her life to making sure we succeeded. The business, our education, our futures, all of it exists because she sacrificed her own happiness for ours. And now you have to sacrifice yours for hers? It's not sacrifice when it's love. But sitting in our driveway watching Julian struggle with invisible chains that bound him to a woman who would never let him go, I wondered if he knew the difference anymore. By my 8th month, I felt like a prisoner in my own life. Dorothy had succeeded in isolating me from everything that mattered. My husband's attention, decision-making about our child, even my own sense of self-worth. I moved through each day like a sleepwalker, going through the motions of pregnancy while feeling increasingly disconnected from the life growing inside me. Dr. Eduardo was concerned about my blood pressure. The stress was affecting both me and the baby. But when I tried to explain the situation to Julian, he dismissed my concerns as pregnancy hormones and emotional instability. Maybe you should talk to someone, he suggested one morning over breakfast, not looking up from his newspaper. Mom knows an excellent therapist who specializes in prenatal anxiety. Of course she did. I don't need therapy, Julian. I need my husband to support me. I do support you. When do you support me? You haven't taken my side once in 3 months. He folded his newspaper with sharp, irritated movements. There are no sides, Madeline. There's just family, and family sticks together. I'm your family too. Are you? The question hung in the air like poison. Because lately, it feels like you're trying to tear this family apart. I stared at him, this stranger wearing my husband's face, and felt something die inside my chest. Not just love, though that was bleeding out too. Hope. The naive belief that things could get better, that we could find our way back to each other, that our child would be born into a home filled with love instead of war. Fine, I whispered. I'll stop trying. Julian looked almost relieved. Good. Maybe now we can have some peace. But peace in Julian's world meant surrender. It meant letting Dorothy orchestrate every detail of our lives while I played the role of grateful recipient. It meant smiling and nodding while she made plans for my child's future that didn't include my input. It meant disappearing into the background of my own story. I tried. For 2 weeks I swallowed my pride and played the part. When Dorothy suggested switching pediatricians, I nodded. When she presented a list of suitable names for the baby, I said they were lovely. When she announced she'd hired a nanny to help me adjust to motherhood, I thanked her for thinking of everything. Julian was happier than he'd been in months. The tension in our house evaporated, replaced by a harmony that felt like defeat. He started coming home for dinner again, bringing flowers and talking about the future with an enthusiasm that might have been infectious if I weren't dying inside. Mom thinks we should add an extension to the house, he said one evening, his arm around me as we watched television. A proper nursery wing with space for a nanny's quarters. She knows an architect. Of course she does. If he noticed the exhaustion in my voice, he didn't comment on it. And she's already put us on the waiting list for the best preschools. Apparently you have to apply before the baby's even born. I felt our child kick and I placed my hands on my belly, whispering silently, "I'm sorry, little one. I tried to make a better world for you." The final straw came on a Tuesday night in October. I was 37 weeks pregnant, uncomfortable and exhausted. Julian was working late again. Another emergency that required his attention after hours. I'd made dinner for one and was settling in for another evening alone when the contractions started. At first I thought they were just Braxton Hicks. False labor. I'd been having them for weeks. But these were different. Stronger. More regular. By 9 o'clock I was timing them on my phone. 5 minutes apart, lasting 45 seconds each. I called Julian. "I think this might be it," I said when he answered. "The contractions are getting stronger." "Are you sure? Remember what the doctor said about false labor?" Another contraction hit and I gripped the kitchen counter, breathing through the pain. "Pretty sure." "Hey, let me just finish up here. Can you call Mom? She'll know what to do." "Julian, I need you to come home now." "I will, I promise. Just call Mom first, okay? She's been through this before." The line went dead. I stared at my phone in disbelief. My husband, the father of the child I was about to deliver, had just told me to call his mother instead of coming home to help his wife in labor. But the contractions were getting stronger and I needed help. Swallowing my pride, I dialed Dorothy's number. "Madeline, is everything all right? I think I'm in labor. Julian said to call you." "Oh." The pause was telling. "Are you certain? First babies usually take much longer than people expect." Another contraction hit harder than the last. I doubled over, pressing my forehead against the cool granite countertop. I'm pretty certain." "Well, false alarms are very common. Why don't you take a warm bath and see if they stop? If it's real labor, the contractions will continue. If not, you'll save yourself an embarrassing trip to the hospital." "Dorothy, I think. Trust me, dear. I've done this 3 times. You'll know when it's real." She hung up. I stood alone in my kitchen, labor pains rolling through my body like waves, and felt more isolated than I'd ever felt in my life. The 2 people who should have been rushing to help me had both dismissed my concerns and left me to handle the situation alone. Fine. I'd handled everything else alone for months. I could handle this too. I took a shower, packed my hospital bag and called a taxi. By the time I was ready to leave, the contractions were 3 minutes apart and I could barely walk through them. I left a note for Julian on the kitchen table. "Gone to hospital. In labor. Call me." But as I waited for the taxi on our front porch, doubled over with another contraction, I saw Julian's car pull into the driveway. Relief flooded through me. He'd come home. He'd realized this was serious and come to help me. Julian got out of the car, saw me hunched over with pain and rushed up the porch steps. "Madeline, what's wrong?" "Labor," I gasped. "Real labor. The taxi's coming." "Hey, let me just grab my phone charger and..." Another car pulled up behind his. Dorothy's silver Mercedes. My heart sank as I watched her emerge from her car, moving with her usual regal grace. She was dressed for an evening out. Black cocktail dress, pearls, heels that clicked against our driveway like a countdown to doom. "How is she?" Dorothy called out, approaching us with the concerned expression she wore when she wanted to appear caring in public. "I think it's the real thing this time," Julian said, running his hands through his hair. "The contractions are pretty close together." Dorothy looked me up and down like she was evaluating livestock. "First labors usually take 12 to 20 hours. No need to rush." "The taxi's almost here," I panted, gripping the porch railing as another wave of pain crashed over me. "I need to get to the hospital." "Nonsense," Dorothy said briskly. "Hospitals just send you home if you're not far enough along. You'll be much more comfortable here until active labor truly begins." She turned to Julian, dismissing me entirely. "Why don't you help her inside? I brought wine to celebrate. This could be the night we meet our grandchild." Julian hesitated, looking between his mother and his wife in labor. For one shining moment I thought he might choose me. I thought he might tell his mother that his pregnant wife needed to get to the hospital and everything else could wait. Instead he said, "Mom's right. It's probably still early. Let's get you comfortable inside and see how things progress." "Juliano, I need to go to the hospital now." But he was already taking my arm, guiding me toward the front door. "Come on, sweetheart. A few more hours won't hurt. The taxi pulled up just as Dorothy opened our front door. She waved the driver away with an imperious gesture. Sorry, we won't be needing you after all. I watched my escape disappear down the street and something inside me shattered. Not just broke, shattered into so many pieces I knew it could never be put back together again. They led me inside like I was a child having a tantrum instead of a woman in labor. Dorothy immediately took charge, sending Julian to open wine while she evaluated my condition like she was a medical professional instead of a controlling mother-in-law with delusions of grandeur. The contractions aren't that close together, she announced after watching me for 5 minutes. And you're still talking through them. Trust me, dear, when it's time you'll know. But I did know. Every instinct in my body was screaming that this baby was coming and coming soon. The contractions were getting stronger, closer together, more intense. I needed professional medical care, not Dorothy's amateur diagnosis based on her 3 pregnancies from 30 years ago. I want to go to the hospital, I said firmly. Yow. Dorothy's smile turned sharp. Madeline, dear, you're being dramatic. First-time mothers always think they know better than experienced ones, but... A contraction hit that was so powerful I couldn't speak through it. I gripped the arm of our couch, my vision going white around the edges as pain unlike anything I'd ever experienced tore through my body. When it passed, I looked up to find Dorothy and Julian watching me with expressions that made my blood run cold. Not concern. Not sympathy. Annoyance. You're scaring Julian, Dorothy said softly. Perhaps you should go lie down until you can control yourself. Control myself. While in labor. With contractions that were now 2 minutes apart. I'm calling an ambulance, I said, reaching for my phone. Dorothy's hand closed over mine, her grip surprisingly strong. You're not thinking clearly, dear. The hormones, the pain, they're making you irrational. Let Julian and me handle this. I looked at my husband, hoping to see some flicker of the man I'd married. Some sign that he understood his wife needed help, not management. Instead, Julian nodded. Mom's right. You're getting worked up and that's not good for the baby. Why don't you try to rest? Another contraction hit, stronger than the last. I doubled over, my water breaking in a rush that soaked through my clothes and onto our hardwood floor. For a moment, the room was silent except for my ragged breathing. Then Dorothy sighed. Well, that's going to stain. Not, oh my God, the baby's coming. Not, we need to get to the hospital immediately. Her first concern was our hardwood floors. That's it, I gasped, struggling to my feet. I'm leaving. With or without you. But when I tried to walk toward the door, Dorothy stepped in front of me. Her blue eyes were ice cold and her smile was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. I don't think so, dear. And that's when I heard the soft click of the deadbolt turning. Julian had locked the front door. The next few hours were a nightmare that seemed to stretch on forever. Every time I tried to leave, to call for help, to get to a phone, to reach the door, Dorothy or Julian would stop me with gentle but firm hands and soothing voices that made me feel like I was losing my mind. You're in transition, Dorothy kept saying, like she was reciting from a medical textbook. It's perfectly normal to feel overwhelmed. But panicking won't help the baby. They moved me to the living room, Dorothy directing Julian to bring towels and blankets while she played the role of concerned grandmother-to-be. But I could see the calculation in her eyes, the way she watched me like a scientist observing a lab rat. This wasn't about my safety or the baby's well-being. This was about control. About proving that she, not I, was the real authority in this family. About making sure that even the birth of my own child happened on her terms, in her way, under her supervision. Julian, please, I begged during a brief respite between contractions. Something's wrong. I can feel it. We need to get to the hospital. My husband looked at me with pity, not love. Madeline, you're scaring yourself. Mom delivered Thomas at home when the hospital was too far away. She knows what she's doing. I'm not your mother. This isn't 30 years ago. I need a doctor. You need to calm down, Dorothy said sharply. All this hysteria is putting unnecessary stress on the baby. But the baby was in distress, I could feel it. The movements had changed, become frantic and then worryingly still. The contractions were overwhelming but somehow not progressing the way they should. Something was very, very wrong. Why, baby? I whispered, tears streaming down my face. Please, something's wrong with my baby. Dorothy's expression softened into what might have passed for compassion if you didn't look too closely at her eyes. The baby is fine, dear. You're just frightened. First births are always scary. She knelt beside me, placing her manicured hand on my swollen belly with a possessiveness that made my skin crawl. There's nothing to worry about. I'm here. Julian's here. We'll take care of everything. We'll take care of everything. Not we'll take care of you. Everything. As if I were just another detail to be managed in Dorothy's perfectly orchestrated world. The contractions were getting worse, not better. I was losing time between them, the pain so intense that I could barely think, barely breathe. But through the haze of agony I could see Dorothy and Julian whispering in the corner, their heads bent together like conspirators. Please, I gasped, reaching toward them with a shaking hand. Please help me. Dorothy returned to my side, her smile serene and terrifying. We are helping you, darling. We're keeping you safe. We're making sure this birth happens exactly as it should. As it should. According to whom? According to Dorothy's twisted vision of how her son's child should enter the world? According to her need to be the center of every important moment in Julian's life? The realization hit me like a physical blow. She wanted me to suffer. She wanted me helpless, dependent, grateful for whatever scraps of assistance she deigned to provide. She wanted to be the hero of this story, the wise matriarch who saved the day while the hysterical young wife fell apart. And Julian was letting her do it. Hours passed in a blur of pain and desperation. I begged, I pleaded, I tried to reason with them. But every attempt to assert control over my own birth experience was met with gentle condescension and firm refusal. You're not thinking clearly, became Dorothy's favorite refrain. Let us handle this. Finally, when the pain became so overwhelming that I couldn't form coherent sentences anymore, when I was sure that both my baby and I were going to die in our living room while my husband and mother-in-law played house, I told them I wanted to take fresh air outside. Dorothy tried to stop me again, but this time around I wasn't going to allow her stop me. You can't go outside in your condition, she'd said. Watch me. I stood up and went outside. I stood there on my own front porch, doubled over as another contraction ripped through me, my hands shaking as I tried to open the door but realized it was locked from inside. I pressed my face against the cold glass of my own front door, my swollen belly contracting with another wave of pain that sent fire through my spine. The porch light cast harsh shadows across my tear-stained cheeks as I watched my husband Julian laugh at something his mother whispered in his ear. They sat at our dining table, my grandmother's antique oak table that I'd refinished with my own hands, sharing coffee and pastries like it was Sunday brunch instead of the night I was giving birth to his child. My child. Our child. The child they'd locked outside in the freezing October rain. Please, I whispered against the glass, my breath fogging the window. Another contraction hit and I doubled over, gripping the doorframe with white knuckles. The pain was getting worse, coming faster. I needed to get to the hospital. I needed my husband. I needed help. But Dorothy, my mother-in-law, just smiled that cold, calculating smile and shook her head. Through the muffled glass I could hear her voice. She made her choice when she disrespected me. Let her figure it out herself. Julian, the man who'd promised to love and protect me until death do us part, didn't even look up. In that moment I made a decision. I called the ambulance, but immediately the ambulance arrived, they unlocked the door and stepped outside, stopping the ambulance from taking me to the hospital. I think it's time to go to the hospital now, Dorothy announced, feigning concerned. Julian rushed up immediately. I'll get the car. Just like that. After hours of dismissing my pleas, ignoring my instincts and treating me like a hysterical child, locking me out of the house, Dorothy had decided it was time. Not because I was in distress, because she was ready. They helped me to the car, Dorothy fussing over blankets and pillows while Julian warmed up the engine. I was barely conscious by then, the pain so intense that I existed only in the spaces between contractions. Don't worry, dear, Dorothy murmured as they settled me in the back seat. We'll be there soon. And then you'll see, everything worked out exactly as it was supposed to. But as Julian pulled out of our driveway, I caught a glimpse of Dorothy's face in the rearview mirror. She was smiling. Not with relief or concern but with satisfaction. She had won. At the hospital everything happened very quickly. The nurses took one look at me and rushed me into labor and delivery, their faces tight with professional concern. Dr. Eduardo appeared as if by magic, her familiar presence the first comfort I'd felt in hours. Madeline, why didn't you come in earlier? She asked, checking my vitals with swift efficiency. You're in active labor and the baby's showing signs of distress. I tried to explain, but another contraction hit and the words dissolved into screams. Behind me, I could hear Dorothy talking to the nurses, spinning her version of events. She was so frightened, poor thing. We tried to convince her to come earlier, but she insisted she wasn't ready. First-time mothers, you know how they are. The lies rolled off her tongue like honey, each one designed to paint me as an irrational, difficult patient while positioning herself as the concerned, experienced grandmother who had tried to help. "We'll take good care of her," one of the nurses assured Dorothy. "Why don't you and the father wait in the family room?" "Actually," Dorothy said, her voice taking on that steel-wrapped-in-silk tone I knew so well, "I'd like to stay. I have extensive experience with childbirth, and Madeline tends to get overwhelmed in stressful situations." Dr. Eduardo looked at me questioningly. In my current state, I could barely speak, let alone advocate for myself. The pain was consuming everything else, leaving no room for words or protest. "It's up to Madeline," Dr. Eduardo said finally. "I want her out," I managed to gasp between contractions. "Please. Just Julian. Only Julian." Dorothy's face went white with fury, but she couldn't argue in front of the medical staff. Not without revealing the controlling monster beneath her concerned grandmother facade. "Of course, dear," she said through gritted teeth. "Whatever you think is best." But as she passed my bed on her way out, she leaned down and whispered in my ear, her voice so low that only I could hear. "This isn't over." The next hour was a blur of medical intervention and overwhelming pain. Dr. Eduardo worked with quiet efficiency, monitoring both me and the baby with the kind of professional concern that Dorothy had been mimicking all evening. "The baby's heart rate is dropping," she told the nurses. "We need to get her delivered quickly. Emergency procedures." Bright lights. Julian holding my hand while medical professionals fought to save our child's life. The child that might have been in danger all evening while Dorothy played doctor in our living room. When Florence Rose finally arrived, tiny, perfect, and blessedly healthy, I burst into tears of relief and exhaustion. Julian was crying too, overwhelmed by the sight of his daughter and the realization of how close we'd come to disaster. "She's beautiful," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Madeline, she's perfect." For a moment, holding our newborn daughter while Julian stroked my hair, I thought maybe we could find our way back to each other. Maybe becoming parents would help him remember what was truly important. Maybe this nightmare with Dorothy would finally end. But then the door opened and Dorothy swept in like she owned the place, her arms full of flowers and her face radiant with triumph. "Oh, she's lovely," she cooed, reaching for the baby without asking permission. "Absolutely perfect. She looks just like Julian did when he was born." She lifted Florence from my arms before I could protest, cradling her with the possessive confidence of someone who'd been waiting for this moment all evening. "Hello, sweetheart," she murmured to my daughter. "Grandmother's here. Grandmother's going to take such good care of you." I watched, exhausted and helpless, as Dorothy claimed my newborn child the same way she'd claimed everything else in our lives. Julian stood beside her, beaming with pride as his mother played the role of doting grandmother for the nurses and doctors. Nobody mentioned the hours I'd spent begging for help. Nobody acknowledged that the baby's distress might have been prevented if we'd come to the hospital earlier. Nobody questioned Dorothy's version of events or asked why a woman in active labor had been kept at home against her will. The narrative was already being rewritten. Dorothy was the hero. I was the difficult patient who'd needed to be managed. And Julian was just happy his mother and daughter were finally meeting. As I lay in that hospital bed watching Dorothy hold my child while Julian gazed at them both with adoration, I understood something fundamental about my marriage, my life, and my future. Nothing was going to change. Dorothy would continue to control every aspect of our lives. Julian would continue to enable her, and I would continue to be marginalized in my own family. Unless I changed it myself. The nurses eventually took Florence to the nursery for her first checkup, and Julian went with them, leaving me alone with Dorothy for the first time since the ordeal began. She sat in the chair beside my bed, her expression serene and satisfied. "That wasn't so bad, was it?" she said conversationally. "Everything worked out perfectly in the end." I stared at her, this woman who had terrorized me for months and tonight had put both me and my baby at risk to satisfy her need for control. "You could have killed us both." "Don't be dramatic, dear. I've had 3 children. I know what real labor looks like." The baby was in distress. Dr. Eduardo said so. Dorothy waved dismissively. Doctors always say that. Makes them feel important. Florence is perfectly healthy, which proves my instincts were correct. Her instincts. Not medical training, not professional expertise, not even basic human decency. Her instincts. You locked me in the house, I said quietly. You prevented me from getting medical care when I was in labor. I prevented you from making a fool of yourself by rushing to the hospital too early. You should be thanking me. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. Even now, even after everything that had happened, she genuinely believed she'd been helping. In Dorothy's world, her judgment was infallible, her decisions were always right, and anyone who questioned her was simply too ignorant to understand her wisdom. I hate you, I whispered. Dorothy's smile never wavered. I know, dear. But hatred is a luxury you can't afford anymore. You have a daughter now. A daughter who needs stability, security, and family unity. A daughter who deserves better than a mother who puts her own emotions ahead of what's best for the family. She leaned forward, her blue eyes cold as Arctic ice. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to apologize for your behavior tonight. You're going to thank Julian and me for taking care of you during your difficult labor. And you're going to stop this foolish rebellion that's been tearing this family apart. And if I don't? Then you'll discover exactly how difficult life can be for a new mother with no support system. No husband who trusts her judgment. No family who believes her stories. No friends who want to deal with her drama. Dorothy's voice was silk wrapped around steel. Julian is a Santino, dear. Florence is a Santino. And Santinos take care of their own, but only when their own know their place. She stood up, smoothing her dress with practiced elegance. I'll give you some time to think about it. But don't take too long. Julian's waiting for your apology, and he's not a patient man when his family is under attack. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving me alone in the sterile hospital room with the echoes of her threats ringing in my ears. I closed my eyes and thought about my daughter, sleeping peacefully in the nursery while her father and grandmother planned her future without consulting the woman who'd nearly died bringing her into the world. Dorothy was right about one thing. I couldn't afford hatred anymore. Hatred was a luxury for people who had the power to act on it. But revenge. Revenge was different. Revenge was patient. Revenge was methodical. Revenge waited for the perfect moment and then struck with surgical precision. And as I lay in that hospital bed, my body broken and my heart shattered, I began to plan. The first few weeks after Florence's birth passed in a haze of exhaustion and growing clarity. Dorothy had been right about one thing. New mothers with no support system faced impossible challenges. What she hadn't counted on was that desperation could be a teacher and isolation could be a gift. While Julian worked long hours and Dorothy held court in our living room with a parade of admirers cooing over her grandchild, I spent my days learning things I'd never bothered to understand before. Important things. Dangerous things. Like the fact that our joint bank accounts had been set up with Julian as the primary holder, giving him the power to freeze my access with a single phone call. Like the fact that our house, despite my name being on the deed, had been purchased with money from a Santino family trust that came with strings attached. Strings that could be pulled if I ever became unsuitable as Julian's wife. Like the fact that the family business Julian managed so successfully was actually a web of shell companies, offshore accounts, and tax shelters that would make the IRS very, very interested if they ever came to light. I learned these things slowly, carefully, during those quiet hours when everyone assumed I was napping or bonding with the baby. While Dorothy entertained her friends downstairs and Julian worked at his office, I sat in our bedroom with my laptop, following paper trails and connecting dots with the methodical patience of someone who had nothing left to lose. The picture that emerged was fascinating. The Santino family fortune, built on Richard's successful investment firm, wasn't quite as legitimate as they'd led everyone to believe. There were questionable transactions, suspicious timing on stock trades, and a pattern of insider information that would have sent lesser men to prison. Dorothy had been more than just a grieving widow managing her late husband's estate. She'd been an active participant in financial schemes that made their wealth possible, and she'd been very careful to document everything, presumably as insurance against anyone who might threaten her position, including Julian. My husband, the golden son who could do no wrong, was completely dependent on his mother's continued goodwill. The business he managed. She owned it. The house we lived in. She held the deed. The trust fund he'd inherit? He controlled the distribution. Julian Santino, successful businessman and devoted son, was actually a very expensive puppet dancing on strings his mother had woven from money, guilt, and fear. Understanding the dynamics was the first step. Gathering evidence was the second. Dorothy kept meticulous records, stored in a home office that she'd shown off to guests like a trophy room. Financial documents, business correspondence, legal papers, all of it organized with the same obsessive precision she applied to everything else in her life. She also kept a journal, a leather-bound book where she recorded her thoughts, plans, and observations about the family. I'd seen her writing in it during those long evenings when she held court in our living room, her pen moving across the pages with decisive strokes. Getting access to these things would be impossible under normal circumstances. Dorothy guarded her privacy fiercely, and Julian would never betray his mother's trust, even for his wife. But circumstances weren't normal anymore. I wasn't the naive young woman who'd married into this family 18 months ago. I was a mother now, with a daughter whose future depended on my ability to outmaneuver the woman who saw her as nothing more than another possession to be controlled. The plan began to take shape during those quiet feeding sessions in the middle of the night. While Florence nursed and the house slept around us, I worked out the details with the same careful attention Dorothy had taught me to apply to everything else. It would require patience. It would require perfect timing. And it would require me to become someone I'd never been before. Someone capable of deception, manipulation, and ruthless calculation. Someone like Dorothy herself. The irony wasn't lost on me. To defeat the monster, I would have to become one. But as I looked down at my sleeping daughter, her tiny fingers curled around mine in complete trust, I knew I would become anything necessary to protect her from the fate Dorothy had planned. Florence Rose Santino would not grow up to be another puppet in her grandmother's collection. Even if it meant destroying everything else in the process. The key to Dorothy's office came to me through pure luck disguised as disaster. Julian's sister Natalie was getting married in 6 weeks, and the pre-wedding chaos provided perfect cover for my reconnaissance missions. Dorothy was in full event planning mode, coordinating with caterers, florists, and photographers while managing family politics with her usual iron fist. During one particularly frantic afternoon, she rushed out to handle a floral emergency at the venue, leaving her purse behind in our kitchen. Inside that purse, along with the usual collection of credit cards and cosmetics, was a small silver key I'd seen her use to lock her office door. I had 20 minutes before she returned. Maybe 30 if the florist was as incompetent as Dorothy had declared him to be. My hands shook as I made an impression of the key using soap and aluminum foil, a trick I'd learned from a true crime podcast during one of those sleepless nights with Florence. It wasn't perfect, but it would have to do. Dorothy returned 35 minutes later, muttering about incompetent vendors and artistic temperaments, completely oblivious to the fact that her fortress had been breached. Getting a copy made took another week of careful planning. I had to wait for the right moment, when Julian was at work and Dorothy was distracted, to slip out with Florence for what I claimed was a routine pediatrician appointment. The locksmith asked no questions and I had my golden ticket to Dorothy's sanctuary. The first time I entered her office uninvited, my heart pounded so hard I was sure the entire neighborhood could hear it. The room was exactly what I'd expected. All dark wood and leather with expensive artwork and carefully arranged family photos that told the story Dorothy wanted the world to believe. Her desk was massive, an antique that had probably cost more than most people's cars. The surface was clear except for a crystal paperweight, a fountain pen, and a small leather journal I'd seen her writing in countless times. I photographed everything. Financial statements showing the intricate web of Santino family accounts. Legal documents revealing the true ownership structure of Julian's business. Correspondence with lawyers, accountants, and business partners that painted a very different picture of the family's wealth than what they presented to the world. But it was the journal that provided the most damaging evidence. Dorothy's neat handwriting revealed a woman who saw people as chess pieces to be moved around a board only she could see. There were detailed analyses of family members' weaknesses, plans for manipulating various situations to her advantage, and cold assessments of threats to her power. The entries about me were particularly illuminating. Madeline continues to resist integration into the family structure. Her attachment to her working-class background makes her unsuitable for the Santino name, But Julian's infatuation makes direct action impossible. Pregnancy may provide leverage. New mothers are typically more malleable, especially when isolated from external support systems. The nursery incident was instructive. Madeline has more backbone than initially assessed, but she lacks the strategic thinking necessary to pose a real threat. Emotional manipulation remains the most effective approach. Labor complications provided excellent opportunity to demonstrate Madeline's instability and poor judgment. Julian now questions her maternal instincts, which will be useful for future custody discussions if marriage becomes untenable. Custody discussions. The words hit me like ice water. Dorothy wasn't just trying to control my marriage, she was already planning for its dissolution. And she was documenting evidence she could use to take my daughter away from me. I photographed every page, my hands steadier now that I understood the true scope of the threat I was facing. This wasn't just about a controlling mother-in-law anymore. This was about survival. The financial records were equally revealing. The Santino fortune was built on a foundation of questionable investments, tax evasion, and what appeared to be systematic insider trading. Dorothy had documentation going back 20 years, all of it organized with the precision of someone who understood its value as insurance or blackmail material. No wonder Julian couldn't break free from his mother's control. She held evidence that could destroy not just his business but his freedom. The devoted son act wasn't just emotional manipulation. It was self-preservation. Over the following weeks, I made multiple visits to Dorothy's office, always during those brief windows when I could be certain of privacy. I copied files, photographed documents, and slowly assembled a complete picture of the Santino family's financial empire. What I found was damning enough to destroy them all. But destruction wasn't my goal. Not yet. I wanted something more precise, more poetic. I wanted Dorothy to understand exactly what it felt like to be trapped, helpless, and dependent on someone else's mercy. I wanted her to experience the same isolation and desperation she'd inflicted on me. And I was beginning to see exactly how to make that happen. The opportunity I'd been waiting for arrived in the form of Natalie's wedding weekend. The entire Santino clan would be gathered at Dorothy's estate for 3 days of celebrations, leaving our house empty and my movements unmonitored for the first time in months. Julian was stressed about his best man duties. Dorothy was orchestrating every detail of the event with military precision, and everyone was too distracted by champagne tastings and rehearsal dinners to pay attention to what the quiet new mother was doing with her spare time. Perfect. I'd spent weeks preparing for this moment, gathering not just evidence but the tools I'd need to execute my plan. A new cell phone registered under a false name. A safety deposit box at a bank across town where Dorothy would never think to look. Legal documents prepared by a lawyer who specialized in high-conflict divorces and custody cases. Most importantly, I'd opened my own bank account, something I should have done years ago but had never bothered with because Julian handled all our finances. It contained only a few $100s from my old savings account, but it was mine, completely separate from the Santino financial web. The wedding festivities began on a Friday evening with a rehearsal dinner at the country club. I played my part perfectly, the supportive wife helping Julian with his tie, the grateful daughter-in-law complimenting Dorothy's event planning, the devoted mother showing off baby Florence to distant relatives who cooed appropriately and then forgot about us. Nobody noticed when I slipped away early, claiming exhaustion and nursing duties. Nobody questioned my absence from the after-party activities. Nobody thought twice about the young mother who preferred quiet evenings at home to social obligations. They saw exactly what they expected to see. Madeline, the meek wife who knew her place. That night, while the Santino family celebrated at the country club, I began the most important work of my life. First, I transferred every piece of evidence I'd gathered to secure digital storage and hard copy backups. Financial records, legal documents, Dorothy's damning journal entries. All of it safely preserved in multiple locations she couldn't access or control. Then I made some phone calls. The IRS has a whistleblower program that rewards people who report tax fraud with a percentage of the recovered funds. The SEC offers similar incentives for reporting securities violations. And family court judges take a very dim view of parents who use children as weapons in custody disputes. I didn't make formal reports that night. That would come later when the timing was perfect. But I established contact with the right people, provided preliminary information, and laid the groundwork for what would become a very thorough investigation of Santino family business practices. By dawn, I had set in motion a chain of events that would unravel Dorothy's carefully constructed empire one thread at a time. But the real masterpiece was still to come. Saturday's wedding ceremony was beautiful in the way only unlimited money could make possible. Natalie looked radiant in her designer gown, the groom seemed genuinely smitten, and Dorothy held court like the queen mother she'd always believed herself to be. I sat in the back with Florence, applauding at appropriate moments and smiling for family photos, all while mentally reviewing the final details of my plan. Everything had to happen in exactly the right sequence with perfect timing to achieve the maximum impact. The reception was even more elaborate than the ceremony. Hundreds of guests filled Dorothy's estate, dining on cuisine prepared by celebrity chefs and dancing to music provided by a full orchestra. It was the kind of event that would be featured in society magazines, a testament to Dorothy's taste, wealth, and social position. It was also the perfect distraction. While everyone celebrated and Dorothy basked in the glory of her successful event management, I executed the final phase of my preparation. Bank account transfers, legal document filings, digital communications with lawyers, reporters, and government agencies. By the time the last guest left on Sunday evening, I had everything in place. Monday morning would bring a new reality to the Santino family. But they didn't know that yet. Dorothy was in an excellent mood as we cleaned up after the weekend's festivities. The wedding had been a social triumph, and she'd received numerous compliments on her organizational skills and impeccable taste. Even Julian seemed more relaxed than usual, the successful completion of his best man duties lifting some of the constant stress that had become his default state. "That went very well," Dorothy announced as we packed away the last of the wedding decorations. Natalie looked beautiful, the ceremony was flawless, and everyone had a wonderful time. It's so satisfying when careful planning produces perfect results. I nodded and smiled, playing my role to perfection. "You did an amazing job. Everything was gorgeous." "Thank you, dear. I'm glad you appreciate the effort involved." She paused, studying my face with those calculating blue eyes. "You've seemed much more settled lately. Less resistant to family input. Motherhood has matured you." If only she knew how much. "I've been thinking about what you said at the hospital," I lied smoothly. "About putting family first and providing stability for Florence. You were right, I was being selfish and emotional." Dorothy's smile was triumphant. "I'm so pleased to hear you say that. Julian will be thrilled. He's been worried about the tension in the house. I want to do better. For Florence's sake." "Excellent. In that case, I have some ideas about how we might restructure things to work more efficiently for everyone." Dorothy settled into her favorite chair, clearly prepared to outline her vision for my complete capitulation. "I've been thinking about the nanny situation and I believe live-in help would be best. I know the perfect candidate. Very experienced, excellent references, and completely loyal to family interests." Loyal to family interests. Translation: a spy who would report my every move directly to Dorothy. "That sounds wonderful," I said, injecting just the right amount of gratitude into my voice. "I could use the help. And I think it would be beneficial for you to take on more responsibilities with the family business. Nothing too complex, of course, but Julian could use an assistant with his administrative tasks. It would give you a sense of purpose beyond motherhood." Administrative tasks. Access to business records that could be used to further incriminate me if things went wrong. Another chain to bind me to the Santino empire. "I'd love to help however I can." Dorothy beamed at me like I was a particularly promising student who'd finally grasped a difficult concept. "Wonderful. We'll start making arrangements immediately. I have such a good feeling about how things are going to work out." She had no idea how right she was. Tuesday morning dawned clear and cold, with the kind of crisp October light that made everything look sharp-edged and significant. I woke up early, as had become my habit since Florence's birth, and lay in bed for a few minutes listening to the sounds of my family beginning their day. Julian's alarm buzzed at exactly 6:30. He rolled out of bed with a groan, stumbled toward the bathroom, and began his morning routine with the same methodical precision he applied to everything else. Shower, shave, dress, coffee, news, briefcase, goodbye kiss that barely graced my cheek. By 7:45 he was gone. Florence stirred in her bassinet, making the small snuffling sounds that meant she'd be awake and hungry soon. I lifted her carefully, breathing in that sweet baby smell that never failed to calm my racing heart, and settled into the rocking chair my grandmother had carved and my mother had refinished and Dorothy had tried to throw away. "Good morning, my love," I whispered against her soft hair. "Did you sleep well?" She looked up at me with those serious blue eyes, Julian's eyes unfortunately, but set in a face that was pure mine, and I felt the familiar surge of fierce protectiveness that had become my driving force. Everything I was about to do was for her. To give her a future free from Dorothy's manipulations, Julian's weaknesses, and the toxic Santino legacy that would otherwise define her entire life. After feeding and changing Florence, I went downstairs to make breakfast and found Dorothy already in my kitchen, dressed in one of her expensive workout outfits and drinking coffee from my favorite mug. "Good morning, dear," she said without looking up from her phone. "I've scheduled appointments with the nanny candidate for this afternoon and the business administrator position for Thursday. I thought we should move quickly on both fronts." Move quickly? Before I could change my mind or cause more trouble. "That sounds perfect," I said, pouring my own coffee and settling Florence in her bouncy seat. "I'm excited to get started." Dorothy glanced up, studying my face for signs of rebellion or resentment. Finding none, she smiled that satisfied smile I'd learned to hate. "Excellent. Oh, and Julian mentioned you've been having some trouble sleeping? I know a wonderful doctor who specializes in postpartum issues. Very discreet, very understanding about the challenges new mothers face. A psychiatrist. Someone who could document my instability and provide expert testimony about my fitness as a mother if custody became an issue." "I'm actually sleeping much better now," I said truthfully. "I think I was just adjusting to the new routine. But thank you for thinking of me." "Of course, dear. We're family." Family. The word that excused every boundary violation, every manipulation, every casual cruelty she'd inflicted over the past year. We chatted pleasantly while I fed Florence her breakfast, Dorothy outlining her plans for my future with the same casual confidence she'd shown when redesigning my nursery. I nodded and agreed and played the part of the grateful daughter-in-law who'd finally learned her place. She had no idea she was looking at a bomb that was about to explode. After Dorothy left for her morning tennis game, I spent some time with Florence, playing peekaboo and singing lullabies while my mind reviewed the final checklist one more time. Everything was in place. Every contingency had been planned for. Every possible reaction had been anticipated and countered. At 11 a.m. I made the first call. "Mr. Harrison? This is Madeline Santino. I'm ready to proceed with the documents we discussed." My divorce attorney was efficient and thorough. The papers would be ready for filing by the end of the day. The custody motion, supported by Dorothy's own journal entries documenting her attempts to manipulate the situation, would be submitted simultaneously. The second call went to the IRS agent who'd expressed interest in the Santino family's creative accounting practices. "Agent Zander? I have those additional documents you requested." The third call was to the reporter at the financial newspaper who specialized in exposing white-collar crime. "Ms. Miller? Yes, I'm ready to go on the record." By noon, I had set in motion a series of events that would destroy the Santino family's reputation, fortune, and freedom. But that was just the opening act. The real show would begin tonight. I spent the afternoon playing the perfect mother and wife. I tidied the house, prepared Julian's favorite dinner, and arranged everything to look exactly as it always did. Normal. Domestic. Completely unthreatening. When Julian came home at 6:30, I greeted him with a smile and a kiss that was warmer than usual. "How was your day?" I asked, taking his briefcase and hanging up his coat like I'd done hundreds of times before. "Good. Busy. Mom said you're excited about the new arrangements." "Very excited. I think it's exactly what we need." He relaxed visibly, probably relieved that the months of tension were finally over. His difficult wife had been tamed, his mother was happy, and his life could return to the smooth, predictable patterns he preferred. We had a lovely dinner. Julian talked about work, I shared amusing stories about Florence's day, and we made plans for the weekend like any normal couple. For a few hours, I almost let myself remember why I'd fallen in love with him in the first place. But then Dorothy called, as she did every evening, and I watched my husband's face light up with the kind of genuine warmth he hadn't shown me in months. "Hi, Mom. His dinner was great. Madeline's been wonderful today." "Wonderful. like a well-trained pet who'd finally learned not to bark at visitors. After Julian went to bed, I sat in the living room with my laptop, putting the final touches on a document that would serve as both explanation and evidence. The story of my marriage, Dorothy's manipulations, and the financial crimes I'd uncovered. Everything documented with the same meticulous attention to detail that Dorothy had taught me to value. It would be published simultaneously on social media, sent to every major news outlet, and delivered to the relevant government agencies. By tomorrow morning, the Santino family would be front-page news for all the wrong reasons. But that still wasn't enough. At 2 a.m. I made one final call. Ruby? It's Madeline. I need that favor we talked about. Ruby, the nurse who'd held my hand during Florence's birth, had become an unexpected ally over the past few months. She'd seen firsthand how Dorothy had tried to control my labor and delivery, and she'd been quietly documenting similar cases of family interference in medical care. Everything's ready, she said quietly. The safe house is prepared and the legal team knows to expect you. Are you sure you want to do this? I looked around the house that had never really been mine, at the life I'd tried so hard to make work, at the marriage that had died the night they locked me out in labor. I'm sure. Then I'll see you tomorrow. Be safe, Madeline. I hung up and walked through my house one last time, memorizing details I'd never see again. The granite countertops Dorothy had chosen. The marble floors she'd insisted upon. The family photos that told the story of Julian's life before me and would continue long after I was gone. In the nursery, I packed a bag for Florence with quiet efficiency. Clothes, diapers, formula, toys. Everything she'd need for the new life we were about to begin. She slept peacefully through my preparations, trusting me to keep her safe even though she had no idea how dramatically her world was about to change. I left 3 envelopes on Julian's pillow. The first contained divorce papers and a custody agreement that would give me primary custody while allowing him supervised visitation. The terms were more generous than he deserved, but I wasn't trying to punish him for being weak. I was trying to save my daughter from becoming another Dorothy victim. The second envelope contained copies of all the evidence I'd gathered about the family's financial crimes, along with a detailed explanation of how Dorothy had manipulated our marriage from the very beginning. Every cruel comment, every power play, every attempt to isolate and control me, all of it documented with dates, witnesses, and supporting evidence. The third envelope was simpler. Just a short note that said everything I'd never been able to tell him while we were married. Julian, I loved you. I loved the man you were before your mother convinced you I was the enemy. I would have spent my life making you happy if you'd let me. But you chose her. Every time you chose her. Now I'm choosing our daughter. Don't try to find us. The legal system will handle custody arrangements and my lawyers will handle everything else. By the time you read this, the world will know who the Santino family really is. You can blame me for that if it helps you sleep at night. But we both know the truth. You did this to yourself. Take care of your mother. She's going to need you more than ever now. Madeline. At 4 a.m., I loaded my sleeping daughter into her car seat and drove away from the house where I'd tried so hard to belong. The October air was crisp and clean, and the eastern sky was just beginning to show the first hints of dawn. Somewhere behind me, Julian slept peacefully in our bed, unaware that his wife and child were gone. Somewhere across town, Dorothy slept in her mansion, dreaming of the compliant daughter-in-law she thought she'd finally created. They would wake up to a nightmare. But for the first time in months I felt like I could breathe. Julian's first call came at 6:47 a.m. I was sitting in Ruby's kitchen, feeding Florence her morning bottle while the news played on the television in the background. The safe house was a small apartment across town, furnished with the basics and stocked with everything we'd need for the next few weeks. My phone buzzed against the counter, Julian's name flashing on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. The second call came 30 seconds later. Then the third. By 7 a.m. he'd called 15 times. Finally I answered. Madeline. His voice was raw, desperate. Where are you? Where's Florence? What the hell is going on? I assume you found my letters. Letters? Madeline, there are reporters outside our house. There are federal agents asking questions about the business. Mom's having some kind of breakdown. You need to come home right now and explain what you've done. The panic in his voice was almost satisfying. Almost. I'm not coming home, Julian. There is no home anymore. What are you talking about? Madeline, you're scaring me. Whatever's wrong we can fix it. Just come back and we'll work it out. Like we worked out the nursery? Like we worked out my labor and delivery? Like we worked out every other problem in our marriage where your mother's opinion mattered more than your wife's feelings? Liked how you and your mom locked me out while I was in labor? Silence. Then, this is about Mom? Madeline, if you're upset about... I'm not upset, Julian. I'm done. I could hear Dorothy's voice in the background, shrill and demanding. Probably asking who he was talking to, what I was saying, how they could regain control of the situation. Madeline, please. I love you. Florence needs her father. Florence needs a father who puts her first. A father who protects her from toxic people instead of enabling them. A father who chooses his family over his mother. I do choose family. You are my family. No, Julian. I was never your family. I was just the woman you married while waiting for your mother to approve of your choices. The line went quiet except for the sound of his breathing and Dorothy's increasingly frantic voice in the background. Madeline, he said finally, his voice breaking. Please don't take my daughter away from me. I'm not taking her away. I'm keeping her safe. There's a difference. I hung up and turned off the phone. Within an hour, the news had broken wide open. Financial empire built on fraud. The Santino family's dark secrets exposed. The headlines screamed across every major news outlet, supported by the mountain of evidence I'd provided to reporters and investigators. Bank records showing systematic tax evasion. Investment documents revealing insider trading. Email correspondences that painted a picture of deliberate, calculated financial crimes spanning 2 decades. But the most damaging revelations came from Dorothy's own journal. Her cold, calculating assessments of family members as chess pieces to be manipulated. Her detailed plans for controlling Julian's marriage and isolating his wife. Her documented attempts to interfere with medical care during childbirth to establish grounds for custody challenges. The woman who'd presented herself as a devoted mother and doting grandmother was revealed as a master manipulator who saw people as tools to be used for her own benefit. The public reaction was swift and brutal. Social media exploded with commentary about the case. #Santino scandal began trending within hours. Women shared their own stories of toxic mothers-in-law and controlling families. Legal experts weighed in on the evidence and its potential criminal implications. Most devastatingly, other victims began coming forward. Julian's ex-girlfriends who'd been driven away by Dorothy's interference. Former business partners who'd been cheated or manipulated. Employees who'd been fired for questioning unethical practices. A pattern of abuse and control that stretched back years, all centered around Dorothy's need to dominate everyone in her orbit. By noon, federal agents had raided both the family business and Dorothy's estate. Julian had been taken in for questioning. And Dorothy herself had been arrested on charges of tax evasion, securities fraud, and conspiracy. The empire she'd spent decades building crumbled in a single morning. My phone started ringing again around 2 p.m. Not Julian this time, he was probably too busy talking to lawyers and federal investigators. This call came from Thomas, Julian's older brother. Madeline, what the hell have you done? Thomas had always been the coldest of the Santino children, the one most like Dorothy in his calculating approach to relationships. His wife had left him 2 years ago, taking their children and citing irreconcilable differences that everyone knew meant he'd chosen his mother over his marriage. I told the truth, I said simply. You've destroyed this family. Destroyed lives. For what? Because Mom hurt your feelings. Your mother tried to take my child away from me, Thomas. She documented her plans in her own handwriting. She interfered with my medical care to create evidence of my unfitness as a mother. She manipulated every aspect of my marriage to isolate me from my husband. That's ridiculous. Mom loves Julian. She loves you. Your mother loves control. He loves power. She loves being the center of everyone's universe. But she doesn't love people, she collects them. You're insane. Maybe. But I'm also free. Thomas hung up, but the calls kept coming. Natalie, sobbing about her honeymoon being ruined by scandal. Family friends demanding explanations. Lawyers trying to gauge my willingness to cooperate with various investigations. I ignored them all. That evening, Ruby brought me dinner and the latest news updates. The Santino story had gone national, picked up by networks hungry for a scandal that combined family drama, financial crime, and a sympathetic young mother fighting against a controlling dynasty. "How are you holding up?" Ruby asked, settling into the chair across from mine while Florence played on a blanket between us. "Better than I expected." It was true. Despite the chaos I'd unleashed, despite the uncertain future ahead, I felt calmer than I had in months. For the first time in a year, I feel like myself again. "Any regrets?" I looked down at my daughter, who was gumming a teething ring and babbling contentedly to herself. She had no idea that her world had been turned upside down, that her father was facing criminal charges, that her grandmother was in federal custody. All she knew was that her mother was there, holding her, keeping her safe. "No," I said firmly. "No regrets." The next morning brought Julian to my door. He looked terrible, unshaven, hollow-eyed, wearing the same clothes he'd had on the day before. The confident businessman had been replaced by a broken man who'd lost everything in the span of 24 hours. Ruby answered the door but let me decide whether to speak with him. I agreed, partly out of curiosity and partly because I thought he deserved a chance to say goodbye to his daughter. We sat in Ruby's small living room, Florence sleeping peacefully in her car seat between us like a tiny reminder of what we'd created together and what I was now protecting. "They arrested her," Julian said without preamble. "They arrested my mother." "I know. The charges are serious, Madeline. She could go to prison for years. She committed crimes for years. This is what accountability looks like." He ran his hands through his hair, the gesture so familiar it made my heart ache for the man I'd fallen in love with. "She was just trying to protect the family. Everything she did for us. She was protecting her power, her control, her version of what the family should be. She loves me. I don't doubt that. But love without respect is just possession. And your mother never learned the difference." Julian looked at our sleeping daughter, his eyes filling with tears. "Can I hold her?" I hesitated, then nodded. He lifted Florence with the careful reverence of a man who wasn't sure he'd get another chance, cradling her against his chest while she slept on, oblivious to the drama surrounding her. "I love her so much," he whispered. "I love you both so much." "I know you do. But love isn't enough, Julian. It never was. What can I do? How do I fix this?" I studied his face, looking for some sign of the man who'd once made me believe in fairy tales. "You can't fix this. Too much has been broken. Too much trust has been lost. So that's it? We're done? Our marriage is over because you couldn't get along with my mother?" The old Julian was still there, I realized. Still minimizing, still missing the point. Still unable to see the situation clearly because admitting the truth would mean acknowledging his own role in the destruction. "Our marriage is over because when I needed you most, you chose her. When I was in labor begging for help, you locked me out of my own house and let your mother play doctor with our child's life. We were trying to help." "Stop." I held up a hand, suddenly exhausted by the familiar pattern of his excuses. "Just stop. I don't need you to understand anymore. I don't need you to validate my experience or admit you were wrong. I just need you to let us go." Julian held Florence for another 10 minutes, whispering promises he couldn't keep and apologies that came too late. When he finally handed her back to me, his face was wet with tears. "I'll fight the custody arrangement. I'll fight for my daughter. You can try. But the courts will see the same evidence everyone else has seen. They'll read your mother's journal entries about using Florence as a weapon against me. They'll hear testimony about the night you prevented me from getting medical care while I was in labor." I stood up, signaling that our conversation was over. "You made your choice, Julian. Now live with it." He walked to the door, then paused and looked back at me one last time. "I really did love you, Madeline." "I know," I said softly. "That's what makes this so sad." After he left, I sat with Florence in the quiet apartment and allowed myself to grieve for the life I'd thought we were building together. The dreams I'd had of growing old with Julian, of raising our children in a home filled with love and laughter, of being part of a family that chose each other every day. Those dreams were dead now, killed by Dorothy's manipulation and Julian's weakness and my own refusal to disappear quietly into the background of their story. But new dreams were already taking shape. Dreams of raising my daughter in a home where her voice would be heard and her choices would be respected. Dreams of teaching her that love without respect was worthless, that she deserved better than conditional acceptance, that she had the power to write her own story regardless of what other people expected. Dreams of freedom. 1 year later, I stood in the kitchen of our new house, a modest craftsman bungalow 3 states away from the Santino Empire, watching Florence take her first tentative steps between the coffee table and the couch. "Come on, sweetheart," I encouraged, crouching down with my arms outstretched. "You can do it." She wobbled for a moment, her chubby legs unsteady but determined, then took 3 proud steps before tumbling into my arms with a delighted giggle. "That's my brave girl," I whispered, covering her face with kisses as she squealed with laughter. The past months had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media attention, and the complicated process of building a new life from scratch. The Santino scandal had dominated headlines for weeks, with new revelations emerging almost daily about the family's financial crimes and Dorothy's psychological manipulation tactics. Dorothy herself had been sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Julian received 5 years, though he was eligible for parole in 3 with good behavior. Thomas had cooperated with investigators in exchange for a lighter sentence, 2 years plus community service and restitution. The family business had been dissolved, its assets seized to pay back defrauded investors and unpaid taxes. The mansion had been sold to cover legal fees and fines. The dynasty Dorothy had spent decades building was utterly destroyed. But none of that mattered to me anymore. What mattered was the life Florence and I had built together in our little house with its sunny yellow kitchen and the rocking chair my grandmother had made. What mattered was the garden I was planting in the backyard and the local moms group I'd joined and the small freelance writing business I'd started to support us. What mattered was freedom. I'd received numerous interview requests from journalists, documentary filmmakers, and talk show hosts wanting to tell my story. The narrative of the brave young mother who'd taken down a corrupt dynasty made for compelling television. But I'd turned them all down. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about punishment or justice or proving a point. This was about healing. Every day Florence and I learned something new about life without the Santino shadow hanging over us. Simple things like choosing our own breakfast without worrying about Dorothy's opinions about proper nutrition. Important things like making decisions based on what felt right rather than what would keep the peace. We had routines now that belonged to us alone. Morning walks through the neighborhood where Florence babbled at passing dogs and collected interesting leaves. Afternoon naps in the rocking chair while I read books I'd chosen simply because they looked interesting. Evening bath time filled with splashing and laughter and no one rushing us to finish. The house had become a sanctuary in ways our old home never had. Every room reflected choices I'd made freely, without input from committee or approval from higher authorities. The walls were painted in colors I loved. The furniture was comfortable rather than impressive. The refrigerator was covered with Florence's artwork and photos of our adventures rather than formal family portraits and social obligation calendars. It was exactly what I'd dreamed of during those dark months when I'd felt like a prisoner in my own life. My lawyer called regularly with updates about the ongoing legal proceedings. There had been attempts by various Santino relatives to challenge the custody arrangement, but Dorothy's own documented plans to use Florence as a weapon had made those efforts futile. Julian wrote letters from prison, long rambling apologies that showed he was finally beginning to understand how thoroughly his mother had manipulated our marriage. I read them but didn't respond. Some wounds were too deep for words to heal, and some relationships were too damaged to repair. But I hoped that someday when he was truly free from Dorothy's influence, he might become the kind of father Florence deserved to know. The doorbell rang just as I was settling Florence down for her afternoon nap. Through the peephole, I saw a familiar face that made my heart race with a mixture of joy and apprehension. My sister Emma stood on the porch, holding a suitcase and wearing the biggest smile I'd seen in years. "Madeline." She swept me into a fierce hug the moment I opened the door. "Oh my God, look at you. You look amazing. You look free." Emma had been the first person I'd called after leaving Julian, the first person to know I was safe and starting over. But this was her first visit to our new home, her first chance to see the life Florence and I had built from nothing. "Look at this place," she marveled, wandering through the small rooms with obvious delight. It's exactly what you always said you wanted." "It's exactly what I never knew I could have," I corrected. We spent the afternoon catching up while Florence showed off her new walking skills and Emma cooed over every developmental milestone I documented in the baby book Dorothy had once criticized as sentimental nonsense. So what's next? Emma asked as we sat on the back porch, watching Florence explore the garden while the late afternoon sun painted everything golden. I don't know, I admitted. For the first time in my adult life I get to figure that out as I go. No 5-year plan? No strategic objectives? No committee meetings to determine the best path forward. I laughed, remembering the Madeline who'd married Julian with a detailed timeline for house buying, baby making, and career advancement. That woman had been so sure she could control her future by making the right choices and pleasing the right people. No plans beyond making sure Florence grows up knowing she's loved for exactly who she is. That's a pretty good plan, Emma said softly. That evening, after Emma had left for her hotel and Florence was asleep in her crib, I sat in my grandmother's rocking chair and allowed myself to think about the future for the first time in months. There would be challenges ahead. Single motherhood was hard even without the complications of a highly publicized divorce and a co-parent in prison. Money would be tight until my business grew. Florence would have questions about her father and grandmother that I'd have to answer honestly but age-appropriately. But there would also be possibilities I'd never imagined when I was trapped in the Santino web of expectations and obligations. Florence could grow up anywhere we wanted to live. She could pursue any interests that caught her attention. She could be anything she wanted to be without the weight of family legacy dictating her choices. Most importantly, she would grow up knowing that her voice mattered. That her opinions were valued. That love without respect was no love at all, and she deserved better than conditional acceptance from anyone in her life. As I rocked in the chair that had held 3 generations of strong women, I made the same promise I'd whispered to my unborn daughter during those dark nights when I'd first realized I was trapped. I would always choose her. I would always protect her. I would always make sure she knew she was enough, exactly as she was. The house settled around us with small creaks and sighs, the sounds of a home that was truly ours. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet except for the distant sound of children playing and dogs barking. The ordinary symphony of ordinary people living ordinary, beautiful lives. For the first time since I'd said I do to Julian Santino, I felt genuinely at peace. Dorothy had been wrong about so many things, but she'd been right about one. Some bonds couldn't be broken no matter what. The bond between a mother and daughter who chose each other every single day was unbreakable. And that was the only family legacy that mattered. The letter arrived on a Wednesday morning in March, delivered by certified mail to the address I'd carefully kept private for 5 years. Florence was at kindergarten. I was working on a freelance article about urban gardening, and the spring sun was streaming through the kitchen windows of our little house. The return address made my hands shake. Federal Correctional Institution, Danbury. Dorothy's prison. I almost threw it away without reading it. Almost. But curiosity won as it always did. I opened the envelope with the same careful precision Dorothy had once used for everything in her perfectly controlled life. Dear Madeline, I expect you're surprised to hear from me. I expect you'd prefer never to hear from me again. I understand that and I respect it, but I have things I need to say before I die. Yes, I'm dying. Pancreatic cancer diagnosed 3 months ago. The doctors give me 6 months at most. I'm sure that news brings you no sadness and I don't expect it to. I've had 5 years to think about what happened between us, about the choices I made and the harm I caused. 5 years to understand what I became and why I became it. Prison has a way of stripping away everything that doesn't matter until all you're left with is the truth. The truth is that I was terrified of losing Julian. Not just to you but to anyone who might come between us. After Richard died, Julian, being the first son, was all I had left of the life I'd built, the identity I'd created for myself. I couldn't bear the thought of sharing him, of becoming less important in his eyes than someone else. I told myself I was protecting him. I told myself I was preserving the family. I told myself that what you saw as control was actually love. But I was lying, Madeline. To you, to Julian, and most of all to myself. What I did wasn't love. It was possession. It was fear dressed up in maternal concern and family loyalty. It was the actions of a woman who confused being needed with being loved, who thought controlling people was the same as caring for them. I destroyed my son's marriage because I couldn't stand the idea that he might love someone more than he loved me. I interfered with the birth of my granddaughter because I couldn't accept that you were her mother, not me. I documented plans to take your child away from you because I believed, in my twisted reasoning, that she would be better off without the mother who actually loved her. I was wrong about everything. Julian visits me once a month. He's changed, Madeline. Prison changed him, but more than that, losing you and Florence changed him. He talks about you both constantly, not with anger or resentment, but with the kind of grief that comes from knowing you've lost something precious through your own stupidity. He's getting out next year. He's already making plans to rebuild his life, and those plans don't include trying to win you back or fighting for custody of Florence. He knows he lost the right to both when he chose me over his family. But he asks about her constantly. He keeps every photo you've sent the lawyer, every school report, every update about her life. He's created a scrapbook of the daughter he's never really known, and he reads it like other people read religious texts. I'm not writing to ask you to forgive him. I'm not writing to ask you to forgive me. I'm writing to tell you that you were right about everything, and to ask you to please, someday when Florence is old enough to understand, tell her that her grandmother was a fool who loved her enough to die knowing she was better off without me. You won, Madeline. Completely and utterly. You saved your daughter from becoming another Dorothy, another woman who confuses control with love and possession with caring. You gave her something I never gave my children, the knowledge that she is loved for who she is, not who she can be molded into being. That's the greatest gift any mother can give her child. I'm proud of you for that. I know my pride means nothing to you, but I needed to say it anyway. Take care of our girl. Keep her safe. Keep her free. Dorothy. P.S. There's a trust fund that was set up for Florence before the scandal broke. It survived the asset seizures because it was in her name alone. The account information is enclosed. It should be enough to pay for her college education and give her a good start in life. It's the only thing I can do for her now, and the only thing left of the Santino fortune that wasn't built on lies. I read the letter 4 times, my emotions cycling through anger, sadness, and finally a kind of exhausted relief. Dorothy was dying and she knew she'd been wrong. Julian was getting out of prison and didn't plan to disrupt our lives. The nightmare that had begun 7 years ago was finally, truly over. The trust fund information was legitimate. I called the bank to verify. $2 million, set aside for Florence's future by a grandmother who'd realized too late that love meant letting go. That afternoon, I picked Florence up from school and watched her race across the playground toward me. Her dark hair flying and her face bright with joy. She launched herself into my arms with the complete confidence of a child who'd never doubted she was wanted, loved, and cherished. Mama, guess what we learned about today? What, sweetheart? Family trees. Mrs. Peterson says every family is different, and that's what makes them special. Sarah has 2 moms and Tommy lives with his grandpa, and I have the best mama in the whole world. She hugged me fiercely and I breathed in the scent of playground dirt and strawberry shampoo, of childhood and innocence and all the possibilities that lay ahead for this brave little girl who would grow up free. You're pretty special yourself, Florence Rose. I know, she said with the supreme confidence of a 6-year-old who'd never been told she wasn't enough. Mrs. Peterson says we're going to draw our family trees tomorrow. Can you help me tonight? Of course. That evening we sat at our kitchen table with colored pencils and construction paper, creating Florence's version of our family tree. It was simple and beautiful. Just the 2 of us, plus Aunt Emma and her husband and their new baby, plus Ruby who'd become like a grandmother to Florence, plus our neighbors the Johnsons who helped with babysitting and shared their garden vegetables with us. What about Daddy? Florence asked, pausing with her green pencil halfway to the paper. She knew she had a father. I'd shown her pictures and told her age-appropriate stories about Julian, always emphasizing that he loved her very much but couldn't be with us right now. She'd accepted this explanation with the matter-of-fact practicality of children who adapt to whatever reality they're given. You can put him on there if you want to. She considered this seriously, then drew a small stick figure at the edge of the paper. He's far away, but maybe someday he can visit. Maybe someday, I agreed. She didn't ask about grandparents because in her world, Ruby filled that role perfectly. Dorothy and Richard Santino were just names from stories, no more real to her than characters in a book. Which was exactly how I wanted it. After Florence went to bed, I sat in my grandmother's rocking chair and read Dorothy's letter one more time. Then I walked outside to our small backyard, where the garden I'd planted 5 years ago now bloomed with vegetables and flowers I'd chosen simply because they were beautiful. I lit a match and watched Dorothy's letter burn, the words turning to ash and floating away on the spring breeze. Some endings I realized were actually beginnings. And some victories were worth every battle it took to win them. Inside, Florence slept peacefully in her bed, surrounded by books and toys and drawings of our little family. Tomorrow she'd wake up knowing she was loved, knowing she was safe, knowing she had the power to choose her own path through life. Dorothy had been right about one thing. That was the greatest gift any mother could give her child. And it was a gift that would keep giving generation after generation, long after the Santino name was forgotten and the price of freedom was just a story we sometimes told about the brave woman who'd refused to disappear quietly into someone else's expectations. The woman who'd chosen love over loyalty, truth over peace, and her daughter's future over her own past. The woman who'd learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away. And sometimes walking away is how you win everything that matters.